August 13th, Aurora, Colorado. A quiet morning in the suburbs was about to turn into a mystery that would haunt the world forever. Shanann Watts, 15 weeks pregnant, had finally returned home from a business trip. But as the sun began to rise over the Rockies, she, along with her two young daughters, Bella and Celeste, were nowhere to be found. The first cracks in the perfect family image appeared when Shanann's close friend, Nicole, arrived at the house. She found something that sent shivers down her spine. Shanann's phone was tucked between the sofa cushions, and her car was still parked in the garage. A pregnant mother doesn't just leave without her phone. She doesn't just walk away without her car. When Chris Watts arrived home from work, his behavior was beyond unsettling. He calmly told the police that Shanann might have gone to a friend's house, but he couldn't say who that friend was. As officers searched the home, Chris didn't look like a man who had lost his family. He was smiling, pacing, and when he spoke to the news cameras later that day, there wasn't a single tear in his eyes. But the real breakthrough came from the neighbor next door. At 5:27 a.m., neighbor Nate's security camera captured something chilling. Chris Watts had backed his truck into the garage, an unusual move he never made. For 50 long minutes, he was seen loading heavy objects into the back of that truck. Chris claimed it was just his work tools, but in that moment, the police realized that behind the walls of that beautiful home, something horrific had taken place. The search for the truth had only just begun. As the investigation deepened, the image of Chris Watts as the perfect family man began to shatter into a million pieces. When the police extracted data from his phone, they uncovered a reality that changed the entire course of the case. Chris Watts was living a secret life. He was done with his marriage and was deeply involved in an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger. Investigators discovered that Chris had been telling his mistress he was getting a divorce, while Shanann had absolutely no idea. She had been writing him heart-wrenching letters, desperate notes asking, "Chris, why won't you touch me? Is it over between us?" But Chris wasn't interested in saving his family. He was busy searching for a way out. On August 15th, the police brought Chris in for a polygraph test, a lie detector. Chris was confident. He thought his fake smile could manipulate the machine just as easily as it had manipulated people. But when the examiner looked him in the eye and asked, "Did you kill your wife?" his pulse and his sweat betrayed him. Chris Watts didn't just fail the test, he failed spectacularly. His score was a -58, a number so low it was practically a confession in itself. When the lead investigator told him he had failed, Chris finally snapped. He asked to speak to his father in private, and there he told a cowardly lie. He claimed that Shanann had strangled the girls, and that in a fit of rage he had killed her. The police knew this was only a half-truth. They knew he was still hiding the darkest part of the story, because the most haunting question remained. If he was innocent, where had he hidden the bodies of his family while the police were searching the Watts home? Their neighbor, Nate, pointed out something that would make the ground crumble beneath Chris's feet. Nate had a high-definition security camera aimed directly at Chris's driveway. As the police, Nate and Chris sat together to watch the footage, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. On the screen at 5:27 a.m. on August 13th, Chris was clearly seen backing his truck all the way into the garage. This was highly unusual. Chris always parked his truck on the street. For nearly 50 minutes, the camera caught Chris pacing between the garage and his truck, loading heavy objects into the back. Not once did Shanann or the girls appear on the screen. There was no one walking to that truck, which meant if they were inside, they weren't moving on their own. Watching the footage, Chris was visibly falling apart. He couldn't take his eyes off the screen. His hands were on his head. He was pacing and mumbling to himself. When Nate remarked, "He's acting really weird this morning," Chris's face turned ghostly pale. He knew every lie he had told was now trapped in 1080p high definition. At the same time, investigators secured the GPS data from Chris's work truck. This data exposed his final lie. He claimed he had gone straight to work, but the GPS showed a 45-minute stop at a remote oil field. Anadarko Site 319. This was the place where Chris thought he would never be caught. The police now knew this wasn't just a missing persons case. It was a hunt for a graveyard. After failing his polygraph test, Chris was left alone in the room, and he finally broke. He confessed to his father that Shanann was gone, but he spun a horrific tale, blaming her. "Shanann killed the girls," he whispered, "so I killed her in a rage." The detectives listening outside knew he was still lying, but they finally had a location. When they arrived at that barren wasteland of Site 319, even the most veteran investigators were left in shock. From a shallow grave, Shanann's body was recovered, but the girls, they were still missing. And what the police were about to find would go down as one of the most cold-blooded crimes in human history. After Shanann's body was discovered, investigators didn't have a single second to waste. The entire area of Curvy 319 was now a grim crime scene. Shanann lay in a shallow grave, but there was still no sign of Bella and Celeste. Police dogs, drones, and forensic teams searched every inch under the scorching sun, but they found no other disturbed earth. Then, a detective's gaze fell upon two massive steel tanks, used to store crude oil. On top of these tanks were small hatches, only 8 inches wide. It seemed impossible. No human being could be capable of dropping their own children into toxic oil. But when they examined the tools in Chris's truck and the fresh marks on the tank lids, suspicion turned into a horrifying reality. As engineers slowly began to drain the tanks, a sight emerged that broke even the toughest officers. The bodies of Bella and Celeste were recovered from the thick black sludge. Chris had forced them through those tiny openings, believing the oil would erase their existence forever. With this gruesome discovery, Chris Watts had nowhere left to hide. On November 19, 2018, in a silent courtroom, he finally spoke the truth that shattered hearts across the world. He confessed that on that morning of August 13th, he had killed Shanann first, then loaded his living daughters into his truck. He revealed that Bella had watched her little sister die, and moments before her own death, she whispered only 2 words: "Daddy, no." The court sentenced Chris Watts to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge looked him in the eye and said, "This is perhaps the most inhumane and vicious crime I have ever handled." Today, Chris Watts is locked away in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin, where he will spend the rest of his days in total isolation. Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and their unborn son, Nico, an entire family wiped out by one man's cold-blooded selfishness. This case remains a haunting reminder to the world that sometimes the perfect life on the surface hides the darkest shadows imaginable.